Time to round up one of the biggest headlines of the week. The search continues for the gunman who shot two officers in Ferguson, Missouri. One officer was hit in the shoulder and the other shot in the face Wednesday night. Both officers have been released from the hospital. The town seemed ready for change after the release of the scathing Justice Department report, but then these shootings happened, and now protests have started up again in the city. It seems there's still deep anger over police and racism. So was this an isolated event, or are police becoming targets again? And what needs to change? That's our topic this half hour. We want to hear from you on our Fox 26 Facebook page. You can also weigh in on Twitter. Be sure to use the hashtag Fox26forlife. Joining us live in the newsroom is our Roundup panel. It's led by our Fox 26 senior legal analyst, Chris Tritico, our news analyst, Mustafa Tamiz, and public policy analyst, Jackie Bally. A lot of people were just heartsick over this news from this past week, right, Chris?
You know, the whole thing is heartbreaking that you can have a situation that continues to fester and grow the way this one has. And when the Justice Department released its report, it was an opportunity to seize upon that to make change. Instead, it broke down into violence and and that kind of feeds upon itself, in my view, and causes more violence and more violence. Hopefully, this will ebb, and we can then start examining this to see how cities can change their police tactics and their policing into something that we can live with and won't foster this type of violence. That's really where I think this Justice Department report needs to go in the direction we need to move in. Mustafa, since the report was released just a few days ago, the Ferguson police chief, the city manager, the municipal court judge, 2 police officers have resigned in the wake of this. But the troubling part about Ferguson is that while most of the citizens are African American, most of the police are Anglo or white, and I think that's really what's causing the problem here.
Well, first, our hearts go out to the families of police officers. I mean, I think the president, the attorney general, and everyone has said that there's no excuse for violence against police officers, regardless of anybody's grievances. But this issue of Ferguson, you know, there's systemic problems in our justice system, and until those problems are addressed, whether it is having more police in smaller police departments like Ferguson, or the justice system being more fair to the people of color, you're going to see things like this. But regardless of that issue, violence against police officers, that's just a no-starter.
Shouldn't the police departments reflect the community to some degree? In other words, in Ferguson, where you have most of the police officers who are white, and obviously the people feel that they are being discriminated against by the white police officers, shouldn't the city have taken some efforts to make their police department more reflect their citizens?
A lot of cities try to do that. I know we try to do that in our city of Sugar Land. But sometimes it's hard to recruit from a certain ethnic background or racial background.
Without getting sued for that.
Yes, and I do think that you started your comments very accurately. I agree with your statement when you said that this was an opportunity, the statement that was released from the Department of Justice, this was an opportunity to heal this process. When we first discussed this topic, I felt that the top law enforcement officer at the time, Eric Holder, did not do us any favor, us as all residents and citizens, by saying, I'm a black man and I don't trust cops either. And I thought that really started another divide that was already brewing in that community, because as a law enforcement officer, the top law enforcement officer, you're supposed to come into the community and try to heal the process. Now what you're seeing is he started this investigation. The report dismissed Wilson and said he did not do anything wrong, but it was just a blip on the radar. I think one of the things that we have to look at is not just what the police officers need to do, it's the community as a whole. I'm a mother of 2 teenage boys, and I've always told them, treat your officers with respect, like you do your teachers, like you do other community leaders. It's a give and take situation with the people in the community and the police officers.
Coming back, I want you to talk about that and what happens when these things fester. And I think that's the problem here, but I'm going to go to Sally. She's monitoring our social media.
Okay, let's take a look at Twitter. We've got a couple of tweets to show you. First, Casey, he says, as an American, I'm very proud to be from Texas, ashamed of the residents of Ferguson, Missouri. And then this person says, how to rebuild Ferguson. Everybody in the local government and the police department has got to go. Clean house entirely.
Well, you know, in response to that second one, they've really pretty much done that. The mayor's
the only one left.
And the mayor said, I'm not resigning. You can vote me out of office. But basically, he said, somebody's got to stay here and run this city. And so I'm not resigning. But they really have cleaned house over there, and they're going to start rebuilding that city. But the first tweet was the one I want you to address, Mustafa, because, well, Jackie makes, I think, a good point that Eric Holder his words probably could have been chosen better. This is something that festers and festers and then erupts. And that's what I think we need to be examining.
Well, first, after Eric Holder left, the protests dissipated. I mean, there were less protests after he left, and his words actually had a calming effect. So factually, that's what happened. The other part, I mean, if you look at the report, it documented systematically that African Americans were stopped as a means to raise money for the local police department. That overwhelmingly it was only the African Americans that ended up paying these high fines that turned into, you know, a few $100 fine turned into several $100s, and it was difficult for people to pay, and therefore there was this animosity against the law enforcement system. So, you know, when you see evidence like that, the only rebuttal we got from the city, well, majority of the citizens are African Americans, and that made no sense to me, because that means that there were no people of non-color that ever speeded in the entire town. That made no sense. So I think the report was clear, and these problems just don't exist in Ferguson. They exist in lots of places in the United States. We
had in Houston 20 years ago an effort to begin community policing again, where we would send people out on a beat. And while I find that noble, in a city this size, it's really hard to put the police out on a beat where they can get to know the citizens. So while Ferguson probably could do something like that, what do you do in a city like this? Well, we haven't had these problems, and I'm not suggesting we do, but what do you do in a city this size to get the police out where they're not having problems fester with the community?
Well, the instance in Ferguson, I mean, it's not just a majority. The city is 70% black. So when you have a population that's 70%, that's comprised of 70% of the entire population, you're going to see more instances of infractions happening to that community, period. I mean, that's just basic math. And a community like Houston, where we're so diverse, I think we're much more blessed, because you're not going to see one group targeted. And we have been working very well together. I think one of the things that our leaders in our cities and our police departments have done is to make sure that they go into our communities, they go into our schools, they go into our churches. And so we do feel comfortable with them, regardless of the color of their skin. And because of the diversity that we have in Houston, you're not going to see that kind of problem. But when one population is 70% of the entire population, you're going to see much more infractions just based on basic math.
Quick final thought.
70%, but there's no representation of their community in law enforcement.
And that's where they ought to be focused.